"You're too dark to be pretty," my grandmother told me when I was 9. I stopped taking photos after that, but at my first exhibition as a photographer, she stood in front of a giant portrait of me titled "The Face of Light." The midday sun filtered softly through the curtains of the Williams dining room, casting gentle patterns across the tablecloth. It was a quiet Sunday, one of those slow-moving southern afternoons in suburban Atlanta, where time seemed to stretch with the heat. Naomi Williams, 9 years old and careful by nature, sat between her parents, carefully slicing into a piece of roasted chicken. Her younger sister, Layla, giggled over a story about her favorite cartoon, while their father poured lemonade and their mother passed warm rolls around the table. At the head of the table sat Evelyn, Naomi's grandmother, poised and composed as always, her silver hair perfectly styled. She had the air of someone used to being listened to, and she often spoke without pause or filter. The conversation that afternoon had turned to school photos. Layla's were due the following week. Naomi, who had once loved being in front of the camera, kept her eyes down. She hadn't smiled in a photo in over a year. Evelyn reached for another roll, glancing across the table. "You know," she said with a light, absent tone, "Naomi's too dark to be pretty, but Layla's got that softer look. She'll photograph well." The words landed like a sudden crack in the air, sharp and dissonant. There was no dramatic silence, no plates dropped or gasps, just a small, strange pause. Naomi's mother stiffened slightly, her father blinked, and Layla, oblivious, kept talking. Evelyn kept buttering her roll, unaware or perhaps unconcerned about the effect of her statement. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't cry. Her fork simply paused mid-air, then gently lowered to her plate. Something in her gaze shifted, the way a shutter closes on a camera, quick, almost invisible, but final. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of idle conversation, but Naomi stopped looking up. She stared into her lemonade, and the sound of forks and laughter faded into a dull hum. Later that evening, alone in her room, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by colored pencils and half-finished sketches. Her favorite camera, a small pink point-and-shoot she had begged for the previous Christmas, lay untouched on her desk. Once, she'd taken photos of everything: her dog, her shoes, even the crack in the driveway that looked like a lightning bolt. But that night, she turned the camera face down, the lens staring into the wood of her desk like a closed eye. The next morning, she refused to get in front of the mirror. Her mother noticed her skipping breakfast, her clothes rumpled, hair not combed the way she usually liked it. Naomi avoided looking into windows or car reflections. Her photos stopped appearing on the fridge. When the school photographer came a week later, Naomi told the teacher she wasn't feeling well. She was excused from pictures that year. For months afterward, it became her quiet rebellion. She never said why she had changed. There were no tantrums, no open defiance. But she no longer smiled for cameras. She no longer played dress-up with Layla or wore her favorite colors. Everything bright had turned into something to be hidden. Her parents, unsure of what had caused the shift, tried to be supportive. Her mother offered new dresses, gently encouraged her to take pictures again. Her father praised her drawings and tried to start weekend art projects. But Naomi remained distant, polite, but withdrawn. It wasn't anger, it was absence. A small part of her had disappeared into a place no one could reach. Evelyn never mentioned the comment again, and perhaps never realized she had said something that mattered. But for Naomi, those 8 words had changed the shape of her reflection. Where she once saw curiosity and creativity, she now saw something less clear, something uncertain, blurry at the edges. The world outside continued as normal. School resumed, seasons changed, birthdays came and went. But inside Naomi, something had shifted. Her love for the camera did not vanish overnight. It simply turned quiet, waiting, as if it too had been told it did not belong. The silence stretched for years, unspoken and unexamined. Naomi kept her distance from lenses and lights, and though she never repeated her grandmother's words aloud, they lingered in her mind like a faint echo, one that would take a long time to quiet. By the time Naomi turned 10, she had learned how to disappear without leaving the room. It was not a magic trick, nor the work of imagination. It was practice, the kind of vanishing that happened in pieces, a glance avoided here, a raised hand unvolunteered there, a silent exit from group play. She moved through the halls of her elementary school with quiet precision, never causing trouble, never drawing attention. To most of her teachers, she was simply shy. To classmates, she was the girl who sat in the third row, always scribbling in the corners of her notebook, never looking into the lens of a phone or school camera. It started small. The school yearbook photo day came again, and Naomi pretended to be sick that morning. Her mother, still concerned by the change but unwilling to force her, let it slide. Naomi stayed home and spent the day organizing the books on her shelf by color. The following week, when her art teacher asked the class to create self-portraits using pastels, Naomi chose to draw a tree instead, tall, rooted, faceless. When the teacher gently reminded her of the assignment, Naomi shrugged and said she didn't feel like drawing herself. The teacher smiled and let it go, writing a quiet note in her report. Naomi is thoughtful, but resists assignments that involve self-image. This resistance grew more subtle, more skilled with time. Group projects that required photo presentations. Naomi volunteered for background work, school assemblies with performances or introductions. She asked to help backstage. Even in her friendships, she kept a gentle distance. Her best friend at the time, a girl named Zoe, often invited Naomi for sleepovers, dance rehearsals, and silly photo shoots with old Halloween costumes. Naomi still went to Zoe's house, still laughed, still played, but when the camera came out, she quietly stepped away, saying she needed to use the bathroom or get a snack. At first, Zoe didn't notice. Later, she asked why Naomi never appeared in any of their pictures. Naomi shrugged again and said, "I just don't like how I look in photos." At school, no one connected the dots. Naomi's grades were strong. She was polite, kind, a quiet helper in the classroom. Teachers appreciated her calm presence. She colored within the lines, never disrupted, never complained. But beneath the quiet, something more fragile stirred. She had stopped raising her hand to read aloud. During presentations, her voice turned so soft that the teacher had to move closer. In art, she became precise but impersonal. Landscapes, geometric designs, empty rooms filled her sketchbook. Never faces, never herself. Even at home, the change became part of the rhythm. Naomi's parents, though loving, were stretched thin with work and Layla's boundless energy. They noticed Naomi's quiet, but mistook it for independence. Her mother often said, "She's just more reserved, like her dad." Her father, in turn, took pride in Naomi's focus and discipline, unaware that her neatness was a form of control, an anchor to something stable. The camera on her desk remained untouched, a silent witness to her growing disconnection. Family events became more difficult. Birthdays, holidays, and church gatherings, occasions that once filled Naomi with excitement, turned into exercises in avoidance. At her cousin's birthday party, Naomi slipped out of the group photo by pretending to check on the cake. At Thanksgiving, when Evelyn pulled out her phone to capture a girls-only picture, Naomi ducked behind her mother and disappeared into the kitchen. No one commented. The absence was quiet, but constant. Her younger sister, Layla, ever energetic and expressive, thrived in the spotlight Naomi now shunned. Layla posed for photos with ease, narrated her day like a performer on stage, and loved dressing up in bright clothes. Naomi watched from a distance, not with jealousy, but with a kind of mourning. It was as if a part of herself had been sealed off, and she no longer knew how to return to it. Every mirror she passed felt like a test, every reflection a reminder. One afternoon in 5th grade, during a classroom activity called All About Me, students were asked to draw a poster showing their favorite things, family members, and a photo of themselves. Naomi filled hers with facts about books, favorite places, and a careful drawing of a sunset over Stone Mountain. When it came time to add a photo, she left the space blank and wrote in tidy letters, "I don't have one I like." Her teacher, Mr. Garcia, paused when he saw the blank space. "Naomi, would you like to take a new photo at school? We can just use the class camera, no pressure." She shook her head. "I'd rather not." He studied her for a moment, sensing something unspoken. "All right," he said gently. "Thank you for your honesty." He didn't press further, but the poster stayed on the classroom wall with its empty square, a quiet statement among rows of bright, smiling faces. Naomi didn't mind. She preferred it that way. She had grown used to the space she left behind, used to the way silence gave her room to breathe. Still, there were moments when the old Naomi flickered through, when Layla made her laugh so hard she forgot to be guarded, when her father told her bedtime stories, and she asked him to describe the characters in detail, when she watched birds land on the backyard fence and imagined what their world looked like through different eyes. These glimpses were rare but real, traces of someone not fully gone but buried. By the time Naomi reached middle school, the distance between how others saw her and how she saw herself had widened. She moved through the world like someone always just out of frame, content to observe but never appear. It was not pain that ruled her, it was invisibility. And yet, something inside her still waited, a seed of memory, a curiosity not yet extinguished. Because even as she turned away from mirrors, a part of Naomi still watched, still noticed, still cared. The summer Naomi turned 13 arrived like a quiet shift in the air, no great transformation, no sudden burst of change, just a steady, slow unraveling of who she had been and who she was becoming. School let out with little fanfare, and while Layla buzzed with plans for sleepovers, pool days and soccer camp, Naomi stayed mostly in her room, sketching or reading on the floor beside her window. She had grown taller that year, her limbs a little longer, her eyes more contemplative, but she still avoided mirrors and photos, still moved through the house like a soft echo, never quite loud enough to be in the center of anything. One Saturday afternoon, with the Georgia heat pressing in thick through the screen doors, Naomi followed her father into the garage. He was sorting through old boxes, the kind filled with forgotten tools, tangled cords, and remnants of past hobbies. Naomi liked watching him work. He moved methodically, as though every object held a memory only he understood. She didn't say much, just sat cross-legged near the door, doodling in her notebook while he pulled things down from the shelves. Then he opened a dusty plastic container and let out a small laugh. "Hey, look at this," he said, holding up a weathered black camera, heavier and more solid than anything Naomi had seen before. "This old thing still around? I used to take this on road trips back in college. Can't believe I held on to it." Naomi looked up. The camera wasn't flashy or modern. It had a scratched metal body, a faded leather strap, and a lens that turned with a satisfying click. He held it out to her. "You want to see how it works?" She hesitated. Cameras still carried a quiet weight in her life, but this one felt different. It wasn't digital. It wasn't about instant images or smiling on command. It felt more like an instrument than a mirror. "Sure," she said quietly. He showed her how to load the film, how to focus by twisting the ring gently, how to listen for the click of the shutter. "You won't know what the photo looks like until it's developed," he explained. "That's the best part. It teaches you to really look." Naomi turned it over in her hands. It was heavier than she expected, solid and cool. She lifted it to her eye and pointed it at the workbench, pressing the shutter. A soft, mechanical sound whispered through the lens. It didn't feel invasive, it felt purposeful. That evening, she walked around the backyard with the camera hanging from her neck. She took photos of the cracked stepping stones, the wilted daisies that her mother hadn't pulled yet, the way the sun filtered through the leaves of the peach tree. She didn't think about how the pictures would turn out. She just watched, framed, clicked. She began taking the camera with her on walks, sometimes through the neighborhood, sometimes to the nearby park. She learned to see in pieces, the curve of a sidewalk, the ripple in a puddle, the way peeling paint told a story. She avoided people at first. There was still something about faces that made her uneasy. But slowly her comfort grew. A sleeping cat on a porch, a child's hand reaching for a swing, an elderly man tying his shoe by a fountain. Each image was a way of looking outward, of connecting with the world without having to show herself. Her room transformed. The old pink camera stayed in a drawer, untouched, but the black film camera sat on her desk like a trusted companion. Naomi taped prints to her wall, not of herself, but of trees, shadows, rooftops, and light through curtains. Her mother noticed but said nothing. Her father smiled quietly whenever he saw her bent over the camera or flipping through the pages of photography books from the library. There was something calming in the process. Naomi found peace in the patience photography demanded. She learned to wait for light, to notice how time moved differently when seen through a viewfinder. It gave her distance and closeness at the same time. She didn't have to be in the picture to feel connected to it. She started a small notebook, a journal of images, not the photos themselves, but descriptions of them. A crow landing on the fence at dusk. Rain on the window like lace. A single red leaf against grey sidewalk. Sometimes she imagined what the photos would say if they could speak. It became her quiet language, her way of translating what she couldn't express out loud. One afternoon, while lying on her stomach under the big oak tree in the backyard, Naomi took a picture of her own shadow. It was long and soft against the grass, stretched by the afternoon sun. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked through the lens and clicked. It wasn't a self-portrait, not really, but it was closer than she'd come in years. She didn't show anyone her photos, not even Layla. They felt too private, too raw, but they were hers. And in them, she started to see something she hadn't seen in a long time. Not just the world outside, but a trace of herself reflected in the things she found beautiful. The summer drifted on, warm and still, with the quiet rhythm of shutters clicking and film winding. Naomi's world expanded through the lens, not in loud or dramatic ways, but in small, precise moments that stitched her back together. She still avoided mirrors, still looked away when phones came out at family dinners. But in her own way, through the viewfinder of a forgotten camera, Naomi had begun to look again, not at herself directly, but at life, at light, at meaning. And slowly, the girl who had vanished from her own story began, image by image, to write her way back in. By the time Naomi entered high school, the camera had become more than just a tool. It was an extension of how she moved through the world. She still said little in crowded rooms, still chose seats by the window, and still left her own image out of every frame. But behind the camera, Naomi felt a kind of presence she had never known in front of it. Her eye had sharpened. Her sense of timing, of balance, of emotion within a frame had grown. She no longer doubted her instincts. Her hands moved with confidence, steady and precise, as if every shutter click was a way of claiming space. She joined the school's photography club not to socialize, but because it gave her access to a darkroom. There, in the quiet red glow, she could bring her photos to life. The smell of chemicals, the slow dance of images emerging on paper, the satisfaction of seeing what she had captured, these things grounded her. She came early and stayed late. The other students were friendly, but Naomi rarely engaged beyond polite greetings. Most didn't notice. She blended in easily. Then one afternoon, the club advisor, Mr. Templeton, announced a local photography contest hosted by the city's Arts Council. "It's open to all high school students," he said. "Theme is emotion. Interpret that however you want. Submissions are anonymous, so don't worry about names or grades. Just your best work." Naomi didn't intend to enter. She had stacks of prints at home, carefully labeled and boxed, but none of them seemed like the right kind of image for something public. The idea of her work being seen, even without her name, felt too exposed. That weekend, as she sorted through a recent batch of film, one photograph caught her eye. It was of Layla sitting on the back steps of their house, her face turned slightly away, sunlight falling unevenly across her shoulder. She wasn't posing. Naomi had taken the photo while testing the light one evening, not thinking much of it. But something about the image held her. The curve of Layla's expression, the quiet in her posture, the warmth in the contrast. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. It said something Naomi hadn't realized she'd captured. She scanned the print, adjusted the exposure carefully, and submitted it under the title Stillness. No name, no explanation, just the image. The contest results were announced a few weeks later, during an evening event at the local community center. Naomi didn't plan to attend. Crowds still made her uneasy, but Mr. Templeton encouraged the entire club to go, and when he saw Naomi hesitate, he added, "Even if you didn't submit anything, it's worth seeing how different people interpret emotion. It's about learning to see through other eyes." Naomi went. She stayed near the back, close to the exit. The room buzzed with conversation, filled with students from different schools, parents, teachers, and local artists. The walls were lined with framed photos, some colorful, some stark, each with a small white label beneath. Untitled. Grief. Joy in motion. Naomi scanned them quickly, unsure if hers had even been chosen. And then she saw it. Her photograph of Layla, enlarged and framed in simple black, was mounted near the far wall. Beneath it, a small silver tag read, "Second place." Stillness. She stood still. People moved past her, chatting and pointing, but Naomi couldn't move. The sight of her photo, of something so private now on public display, sent a strange current through her. She felt proud, but also exposed. It was a piece of her heart hanging on the wall, and no one knew it was hers. Two women stood in front of the image, admiring it. One of them leaned in and said, "There's so much quiet in this," like the photographer knew exactly how that person felt. The other nodded. "Whoever took this has an eye for emotion. You can feel the space in it." Naomi listened without speaking. She didn't step forward. She didn't correct them or claim the work. She simply watched. That night when she got home, she found Layla in the living room, finishing homework. Naomi sat down beside her. "I took a photo of you," she said. Layla looked up. "When?" "Remember that evening on the steps? I submitted it to a contest. It won second place." Layla's eyes widened. "Wait, you used me in your contest photo?" Naomi nodded. "You looked peaceful." "I didn't tell anyone, it was anonymous." Layla smiled, then leaned her head against Naomi's shoulder. "That's kind of cool. I'm famous now." Naomi laughed softly. It felt easy. The moment didn't need explanation. Layla didn't ask to see the photo, didn't ask why Naomi had chosen that one. She just accepted it the way she always had, with warmth and simplicity. Naomi printed a copy of the photograph later that week and pinned it to her bedroom wall. It was the first of her own images she allowed to stay visible for more than a few days. She didn't label it, didn't mark it with a date, but she kept it there, just above her desk, where the morning light touched it gently each day. It reminded her of something she hadn't realized until then, that her voice had never truly gone silent. It had just changed shape, and now, through glass and shadow, through light and lens, it had begun to speak. By her senior year of high school, Naomi had quietly built something that resembled a world of her own. She moved through her final semesters with calm precision, attending classes, completing assignments, nodding politely at the occasional compliment about her photography, but never lingering long in anyone's spotlight. She was well liked, though few people knew her beyond the surface. Her presence was familiar but always just out of reach, like a shadow that moved alongside the light but never fully entered it. What most of her classmates did not know was that Naomi had spent the past 2 years carefully compiling a portfolio of her work. What had started as a hobby had grown into a quiet discipline. Every weekend, she ventured through neighborhoods, hidden parks, public transit stations, and empty lots, always with her camera strapped over one shoulder. She captured small unnoticed things, hands gripping subway rails, cracked paint on playground slides, faces turned slightly away, filled with thought. Her subjects were rarely posed. She preferred moments stolen from motion, images that said something unscripted. She had created dozens of prints, sorted by theme and emotion, stillness, distance, warmth, longing. The portfolio grew in secret, stored in a weathered case beneath her bed, wrapped in cloth to protect the edges of each mounted print. Her parents knew she loved photography, but not the full extent of her commitment. Her classmates saw her carrying a camera, but assumed it was for school credit or personal enjoyment. No one knew that Naomi, who once couldn't bear to be photographed, was now planning to study photography in college. It had begun with an online search, just curiosity at first. She typed top visual arts programs into her browser late one night and found herself staring at the homepage of an art school in New York City. The photographs in their student gallery caught her breath. Images that felt raw, human, urgent. Something about the school felt different, not just prestigious, but alive. She read every detail of the application process, then saved the page and closed her laptop. She didn't tell her parents right away. She wasn't afraid of rejection from the school. She was afraid of something quieter, more familiar, a dismissive comment, a raised eyebrow, a moment of doubt that would shrink her back into the place she had spent years climbing out of, especially from her grandmother, Evelyn, who still came over most Sundays and still offered comments like weather forecasts, brief, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. Naomi had not forgotten the first one. It still shaped the edges of her reflection, even if she had learned to keep it out of her photos. In secret, she assembled the portfolio required for the application. It needed to tell a story, not of technical skill alone, but of perspective, of who she was and how she saw. Naomi chose images that revealed her quiet eye, a man resting on a city bench, eyes closed in the cold. A single glove dropped on a rainy sidewalk. A young girl pressed against a window, watching traffic with wonder. She included no names, no captions, only images, arranged in a deliberate order that moved like a narrative without words. The day she uploaded the files and clicked Submit, her hands trembled slightly. She didn't know what she expected, certainty maybe, or relief. Instead, she felt something closer to resolve, the kind that comes from doing something that matters, even if no one sees it. Weeks passed. She told no one. She carried on with her classes, took more photos, worked part-time at the local bookstore. Her parents encouraged her to apply to state colleges, and Naomi did half-heartedly, selecting majors like English and communication to fill the blank spaces. She attended college fairs with a polite smile and nodded through guidance counselor meetings. But inside, all her hope clung to a single envelope from New York. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, addressed to her full name in black ink, the return address from Manhattan printed neatly in the corner. Naomi stood in the driveway holding the envelope for several minutes before going inside. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she went upstairs, closed her bedroom door and sat on the edge of her bed. Then she breathed once, deeply, deliberately, and opened it. Inside was a formal letter with the school's emblem embossed at the top. "We are pleased to inform you." The words blurred slightly as her eyes welled up. She didn't cry, not quite, but she sat very still, holding the letter with both hands, as if afraid it might vanish. She didn't show it to anyone that evening. Not her parents, not Layla. Certainly not Evelyn. She tucked the letter back into the envelope, placed it beneath the cloth-wrapped portfolio case, and slid it carefully under her bed. She needed time, not just to tell them, but to believe it herself. A week later, Naomi sat in the kitchen with her mother while Layla practiced piano in the next room. Her father was at work, and Evelyn wasn't visiting that Sunday. Naomi pulled the envelope from her backpack and set it on the table. "I got into a college," she said. Her mother looked up, surprised. "Which one?" Naomi slid the letter across the table. Her mother read silently, her brow furrowed with focus. When she looked up again, her expression was complicated. Not disappointment, not disapproval, but something cautious. "New York," she said slowly. "That's far." Naomi nodded. "It's a visual arts program. Photography." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then softly she asked, "Have you told your grandmother?" Naomi shook her head. Her mother didn't press. She only said, "You'll need to show us your work. Your father will want to see. I'd like to see too." That night, Naomi opened the portfolio for her family. She didn't explain the images. She let them speak for themselves. Her father watched with quiet pride, his eyes lingering on certain photos longer than others. Layla pointed excitedly to the ones she recognized. Her mother sat beside her, absorbing each frame with careful attention. They didn't ask why Naomi had hidden it. They seemed to understand in their own way. Only Evelyn remained outside that moment. Naomi knew she would need to be told eventually, but she waited. Not out of fear this time, but choice. The portfolio was no longer a secret. It was a part of Naomi now, real, seen, and moving forward. And when she was ready, she would share it with everyone, on her own terms. The noise of New York City was unlike anything Naomi had ever known. It wasn't just loud, it was layered. Sirens weaved through street music. Conversations floated up from subway grates. Taxi horns tangled with the rustle of newspapers and the shuffle of thousands of feet. Everything moved faster, pressed closer, felt heavier and brighter all at once. Naomi arrived in the city a week before classes started, staying in a small student dormitory, nestled between two tall brick buildings near Union Square. The room was narrow but clean, with a single bed, a desk beneath a window and walls bare except for the institutional white paint that reflected the sunlight with an almost clinical glare. For the first time in her life, Naomi was anonymous in a place where no one knew her history. There were no familiar faces, no childhood habits clinging to her identity, no subtle expectations shaped by old conversations. She could walk for hours and pass hundreds of people, who would never ask about her past or comment on her appearance. It was a kind of freedom she hadn't expected, and at first it frightened her. The silence she had once guarded so carefully now felt like space she had to fill. Orientation week was a blur of schedules, ID badges, and introductions. Her classmates came from cities and towns all over the country, some confident, some awkward, many bursting with ambition. Naomi spoke only when necessary, but her photographs displayed in early portfolio meetings said enough. Her professors took notice. One of them, a tall, quiet woman named Professor Linden, wrote a comment on Naomi's submission after the first critique. "You have a gift for silence. Learn to use it without hiding in it." That sentence stayed with her. Classes began in earnest, with assignments that challenged Naomi in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had been so used to working alone, choosing her subjects, her angles, her lighting. Now she was expected to collaborate, to critique and be critiqued, to explain her choices in front of a room full of eyes. It made her uneasy, not because she lacked confidence in her work, but because it forced her to name things she had spent years burying beneath images. The most difficult assignment came 6 weeks into the semester, a personal narrative series. "Tell your story in 6 photographs," Professor Linden had said. "You can include yourself or not, but the images must come from truth, not performance." Naomi froze. Her story wasn't loud or linear. It didn't have a moment of revelation. It was built on absences, on words not said, mirrors not faced, moments slipped past. How did one photograph the echo of a wound? How did one show a voice that had once been silenced by something as casual and cruel as a comment tossed across a dinner table? She spent days wandering the city with her camera, but found nothing that fit. She shot dozens of frames, shadows on alley walls, broken glass on fire escapes, reflections in puddles, but none of them held the thread of her story. They were beautiful, maybe even powerful, but not personal. She considered not submitting anything, but something in her resisted that silence. Not again. Not here. One evening, back in the dorm room, Naomi sat on the floor, surrounded by prints and negatives. Her fingers moved slowly, almost instinctively, sorting through years of images. She stopped on a photo she had taken 3 years earlier, the one of Layla on the steps. It wasn't new, but it was true. Then another, her own shadow in the grass. Then a third, an empty bench she had photographed the week after getting into college. She began to see a pattern, not in the subjects, but in what was missing. Her presence, her face, her body, always behind the camera, always watching, always absent. It was then that she realized what the 6th photo needed to be. The next day she went to the studio alone. It was early, barely light outside, and the campus hallways were still asleep. She adjusted the lights, tested the angles, marked the floor with tape. She stood behind the camera, looked through the lens, then walked in front of it. She didn't pose, she didn't smile, she didn't tilt her head or adjust her clothes. She just stood there, eyes steady, hands relaxed at her sides, and pressed the remote shutter. Click. She took one photo, then she turned off the lights and left. She didn't look at it right away. The image sat untouched in her camera for 2 days before she finally transferred it to her computer. When the photo loaded on the screen, she felt something tighten in her chest. Not because it was beautiful, it wasn't. Not because it was painful, it was, in a quiet way, but because it was honest. It looked like someone standing in the middle of their own life, not asking for approval, just choosing to be seen. When she turned in the assignment, she included the self-portrait as the final frame. Her classmates viewed the series during critique week. They asked about her choices, commented on the progression, noted how the final image changed everything that came before it. One student, a boy named Theo, said, "It's like you were telling a story in shadows and then finally decided to step into the light. It doesn't feel staged, it feels earned." Professor Linden nodded. That's exactly it. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. For the first time, the silence wasn't hiding her, it was carrying her. That night, she walked through the city alone, camera slung at her side, coat buttoned against the autumn wind. The lights of New York flickered in windows and puddles, in the shine of taxis and the dim hum of corner bodegas. She took no photos. She just walked. And with each step, she felt a little more solid, a little more real. The first time Naomi met Janelle, she was crouched on the floor of the campus library, struggling to adjust the lens on an old film camera she had borrowed for an analog photography assignment. Her digital gear sat neatly packed in her bag, but this particular professor insisted that each student spend at least one project working with physical film. No previews, no deletions, no second chances. Naomi didn't mind the challenge. What she minded was the fact that the lens on the borrowed camera refused to lock in place. "You have to twist it like you mean it," said a voice behind her. Naomi looked up. A tall girl with honey-colored skin, thick glasses, and bright green headphones around her neck stood watching her with a crooked smile. She wore a loose denim jacket covered in iron-on patches and held a sketchbook filled with chaotic lines and color swatches. "I didn't realize it required emotional commitment," Naomi said dryly, and Janelle laughed, a big, unfiltered sound that filled the quiet aisle between shelves. "That's exactly it," she said, dropping to the floor beside her. "Her cameras are needy. They want to know you care." Naomi didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. Janelle reached for the camera, flipped it over, and with a single confident twist, clicked the lens into place. There, love and pressure, works every time. From that moment, Janelle became a part of Naomi's life without waiting for permission. She didn't force conversation, but she never stayed quiet for long. She spoke in metaphors, drew constantly, and kept a list of quotes taped to her dorm door. She had grown up in Baltimore, where her mother was a spoken-word poet and her father a community muralist, and her entire presence seemed to radiate a kind of vibrant ease, unapologetic, expressive, fearless. Naomi wasn't used to people like Janelle. She had friends, sure, but most of them moved within boundaries she understood. Polite, quiet, reserved. Janelle was none of those things. She cried when a project moved her, danced down hallways between classes, and took selfies without flinching. Naomi watched her with a mix of admiration and confusion. What surprised her most was that Janelle never asked Naomi to change. She didn't push for stories or explanations, she just noticed. When Naomi showed her photographs, Janelle looked at them as if they were already whole. "So you see people," she said one afternoon as they reviewed a series of portraits Naomi had taken around the city. "But not how they look, how they feel. That's rare." Naomi didn't know what to say to that. So instead, she asked about Janelle's own work and listened as she described a project she had started the year before called Unseen Faces, a growing collection of portraits and interviews with people who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that they didn't matter. Street vendors, janitors, delivery drivers, women with scars, men with broken teeth, elders with fading eyes. Janelle had a gift for finding beauty where others looked away. "I want people to remember what they forget to see," she said simply. That idea stayed with Naomi. They began going out together on weekends, cameras in hand, notebooks in their pockets. Janelle conducted the interviews, sometimes over coffee, sometimes on sidewalks. Naomi took the photos. She learned how to approach strangers with care, how to wait for the right moment without forcing it, how to capture not just features but truths. It was the first time she had photographed people with intention, not just observation. They met a woman named Rosa, who had worked as a seamstress for 40 years and carried a small photo of her deceased son in her apron pocket. They met Darnell, a former jazz musician turned janitor, who still hummed saxophone melodies under his breath while sweeping subway platforms. They met Clara, a woman with vitiligo who had been told as a child to cover her face with makeup, but had stopped doing so 5 years ago. Each portrait was a conversation. Each image held a story. The project grew quickly. They printed the photos and quotes onto large sheets and tacked them onto corkboards in the student center. Students stopped to read, lingered, asked questions. One day, Naomi returned to find someone had written on a sticky note beneath a portrait, "I saw myself in this." Janelle grinned when Naomi showed her. "Told you, this is how change starts." For the first time, Naomi felt the edge of her old silence begin to shift, not just in how she saw others, but in how she allowed herself to be seen. She still didn't seek the camera's lens, still preferred to be behind it, but she no longer felt like she was hiding. Her absence wasn't about fear anymore. It was a choice. And in choosing, she had begun to reclaim something that had once been taken. Late one night, after finishing a new set of prints for the project, Naomi found herself alone in the studio. The lights were dim, the walls lined with drying photos, and the silence felt heavy in a way that didn't scare her anymore. She stared at the most recent portrait, a boy no older than Layla, eyes wary but open, mouth held in a question. She thought about the first time she had refused a photo, about the dinner table, about Evelyn's voice, and the words that had folded her into herself. She thought about the years of avoidance, the notebooks of images, the photographs that had spoken for her. Then, slowly, she turned toward the mirror in the corner of the room. It wasn't large, just a small glass square meant for checking composition. She walked over, stood in front of it, and looked. Not quickly, not with criticism, just looked. Her face had changed over the years. Sharper now, her eyes steadier. Her skin held the soft glow of studio light, and for the first time in a long while she saw no shame in it, no fault to fix. Just a girl with a camera, a girl with a voice, a girl who had learned to see. There was something about the studio at night that made Naomi feel both small and powerful. The silence was deeper than during the day, the shadows longer, the air heavier. Most students avoided working that late, but Naomi had grown to appreciate the solitude. The hum of the overhead lights, the soft tap of her shoes against the floor, the feel of the tripod beneath her hands, these things grounded her, gave her focus. The city outside still pulsed with life, but within those four walls everything slowed. She hadn't intended to stay long that evening. Her plan was simple. Test a new lighting setup for a portrait series she and Janelle had been planning, review a few test shots and go home. But once inside, Naomi fell into rhythm, moving lights, adjusting filters, shifting angles. The studio's stillness offered no pressure, and without anyone watching, she could experiment freely. She set the tripod in the center of the room and angled the lens toward an empty chair. A softbox light cast a wide, diffused glow across the floor. Naomi stepped in and out of the frame several times to check exposure, each time walking carefully back to the camera to review her adjustments. On the third pass, she paused. Her reflection appeared faintly in the dark window of the studio door, barely visible, but there. She turned toward it. It had been years since Naomi had truly looked at herself without purpose. Not to adjust her appearance, not to fix anything, just to see. The image in the glass wasn't perfectly clear. It was layered with reflections, the room, the lights, the lens behind her. But her own shape stood distinct. She didn't step away. Instead, with quiet curiosity, she returned to the camera, set the timer, and walked slowly to the center of the frame. No posing, no hiding. She stood upright, arms relaxed by her sides, and waited. The shutter clicked. A flash of light, then stillness. She didn't take another. She turned off the lights, packed the equipment, and walked back to her dorm under the hum of street lamps. She didn't review the photo that night. She didn't even think about it again until 3 days later, when she began organizing her files for a different project. It appeared without announcement, just another image in the reel. Naomi froze when it came into view, not because of how she looked, but because of how she felt looking at it. The photo wasn't dramatic. There was no special expression, no stylized background, but her posture was steady, her gaze direct. The light fell across her features in soft contrast, illuminating without flattening, and for the first time in her life, she saw herself not as an object, not as something to judge or correct, but as a subject with presence, a person, complete. She didn't delete it, she didn't edit it, she simply saved it in a new folder, titled it with the date, and closed her laptop. For days, she didn't mention the photo to anyone. It stayed like a secret beneath her skin, one not born of shame, but of something more delicate, more personal. She didn't know what to do with it. It didn't belong to any assignment. It wasn't part of any project. It was just hers. But the image began to shift something inside her. Slowly, imperceptibly, the weight she had carried for so long began to loosen. Not vanish, there were still traces of it in how she avoided mirrors, how she hesitated when others raised their cameras. But she had for a moment stood in the light, not because someone asked her to, but because she chose to. Janelle noticed the change before Naomi spoke a word about it. "You're different lately," she said one afternoon, as they sorted through photos for the next installment of Unseen Faces. "Not in a bad way, just less afraid, Naomi didn't deny it. She simply said, "I took a photo of myself. I didn't plan to, but it felt right." Janelle didn't rush to see it. She only smiled, nodded, and said, "That's huge. That's art too, you know. Not just what you show the world, but what you allow yourself to see." Naomi thought about those words often. She began to notice new things, how people's eyes softened when they saw themselves in her photos, how vulnerability turned to strength when framed with care. She wondered if that same transformation could happen for her too, if the image she had captured that night could become more than an accident, a choice, a beginning. One evening she returned to the studio alone. This time, she brought a print of the photo. She pinned it gently to the corkboard where works in progress were displayed. She didn't label it, didn't explain it, didn't sign her name. By morning it had drawn attention. Someone left a small note beneath it, scrawled in pencil. "There's honesty in this. It lingers." Naomi saw the note. She didn't take the photo down. She didn't need to hide anymore. The image remained on the board for 2 weeks, untouched, observed, quietly powerful. Naomi never claimed it aloud, but she began to feel the edges of her past dulling, not erased, but reshaped by a new frame. She still preferred being behind the lens, still found comfort in observing, but now that comfort came with a kind of courage, because somewhere between the shadows she had once hidden in and the light she had begun to step into, Naomi had taken a photo she never meant to take, and it had changed her. Naomi hadn't been home in over a year. Between the demands of her program and the quiet distance she had learned to keep from her past, she had found reasons not to return. Holidays were spent with friends in the city. Summer break became an opportunity for internships and personal projects. Even calls home were brief, spaced out over weeks, her voice steady but restrained. It wasn't anger that kept her away. It was a need for space. Distance had given her the clarity to grow without interruption, to evolve outside the familiar rhythms that had once defined her. But when her cousin Ava announced her high school graduation, Naomi knew she couldn't stay away. The invitation arrived in the mail, a card decorated with gold lettering and a photo of Ava beaming in her cap and gown. Her mother called 2 days later, hopeful but tentative. "It would mean a lot to her if you came," she said. "We all miss you." So Naomi booked a flight and packed her camera, not because she intended to use it, but because it had become a kind of compass, something to hold on to in uncertain places. She arrived in Atlanta on a humid Thursday evening, the airport thick with travelers and summer air. Her parents picked her up at the curb. Her mother hugged her tightly, her father offered a quiet smile, and neither asked too many questions. Layla greeted her at home with excitement, pulling her into her bedroom to show off new posters and stories from school. Naomi listened, grateful for the ease between them. Some things hadn't changed, but what did change, what Naomi noticed immediately, was the way Evelyn watched her. Her grandmother still came for dinner every Sunday. She still wore her pearl earrings and carried herself with the same composed pride. But the air between them had shifted, not dramatically, just slightly bent, like a tree under weight that hadn't broken but now leaned in a different direction. "You've grown into yourself," Evelyn said that first evening, eyes scanning Naomi in a way that didn't feel critical, only curious. "City life suits you." Naomi nodded, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to pretend either, so she said nothing. The days passed with quiet efficiency. Naomi helped her mother prepare for the graduation party, drove Layla to and from friends' houses, and stayed mostly to herself in the evenings, reviewing photos from her final semester. She hadn't told anyone about the self-portrait. It remained a private truth, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she wasn't ready for what it might open. The ceremony itself was held in a large auditorium, filled with clapping relatives and bright stage lights. Naomi sat beside her parents, clapped when Ava's name was called, and smiled at the speeches without really hearing them. She watched faces in the crowd, how people leaned forward when someone they loved appeared on stage, how applause softened at the edges with pride. Afterward, at the reception in her aunt's backyard, Naomi took photos of the family. It was the first time she had used her camera at home in years. People noticed, but no one asked why. She moved through the crowd with quiet familiarity, capturing moments without intruding. Ava hugging her mother, Layla spinning in a circle near the garden, her uncle laughing with a plate balanced on one hand. For the first time, Naomi didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a witness. Later, while reviewing her shots near the porch, Evelyn approached. "You always had an eye," she said, watching Naomi work. "Even when you were little, always looking at things differently." Naomi didn't answer. Her fingers paused over the controls, waiting. Evelyn looked toward the yard, then back at Naomi. "I said something once, a long time ago. I don't remember the exact words, but I know I hurt you. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it wasn't avoidance either." Naomi kept her gaze steady. "You told me I was too dark to be pretty," she said, her voice calm, matter of fact. Evelyn blinked slowly. "Did I?" "Yes." A long silence followed, the kind that stretches with weight, not time. "I suppose I thought I was being honest," Evelyn said finally, almost to herself. "We grew up with different rules, different expectations." Naomi nodded. "I know." They stood together for a moment, the sounds of the party fading behind them. Evelyn didn't try to justify it further. Naomi didn't press for more. When she returned to New York the next day, Naomi brought the photos from the graduation with her. She printed a few and mailed them to Ava. One of them, an image of Evelyn standing near the garden, hands clasped in front of her, eyes softened in thought, she kept for herself. Not because it excused anything, but because it told a part of the story that mattered. The ties between them hadn't broken, but they had bent, and sometimes that was enough to start again. The final semester of Naomi's undergraduate program arrived with a mixture of weight and anticipation. 4 years had passed since she first stepped into that small dorm room, unsure of how much space she was allowed to occupy. Now, as she walked across campus for the first day of her senior exhibition course, her steps felt firmer. She no longer feared the gaze of others, nor did she flinch when called upon to speak. The quiet that had once served as a shield now felt more like a deliberate pause, a space she controlled, shaped, and filled with intention. The course, taught once a year by Professor Linden, was known to be demanding. Each student was required to prepare a full gallery exhibition, open to the public, complete with artist statements, layout planning, and a final presentation. The stakes were high, not just academically but personally. This would be the culmination of everything they had created, endured, and discovered. From the beginning, Naomi knew what hers had to be. She had carried the photo with her for almost a year now, the self-portrait she had taken late that night in the studio, the one she never meant to capture. It had remained tucked away in a folder, opened only on rare occasions when Naomi needed to remind herself of what courage could look like. She had never printed it, never shared it, never spoken about it to anyone outside of Janelle. But now, as she considered the space that would be hers for the exhibition, a wide corner wall with natural light pouring through the tall windows, she saw it clearly. The photo would not be a detail. It would be the centerpiece. The decision didn't come lightly. She debated other themes, considered compiling a series from the Unseen Faces project, or perhaps creating a visual essay about light and memory through the streets of New York. All valid ideas, all safe. But safety had defined too much of her past. She chose instead to center the exhibition around the idea of presence, not visibility for attention's sake, but the quiet, deliberate act of being seen, of existing fully, without apology. She curated 12 images from across her journey, the early street portraits, the quiet corners of home, even one of Layla captured during a snowfall on a visit to the city. Each image formed a path leading to the final frame. At the heart of the gallery, printed large and framed in matte black, stood the self-portrait. Naomi titled the exhibition, "The Face of Light." In her artist statement, she wrote, "This collection is not a timeline. It is a reclamation. For years, I documented the world as a way to avoid appearing in it. I thought observation was safety. I mistook distance for strength. But in every face I photographed, I saw reflections of a story I had been afraid to tell. This final image is not just a portrait. It is a moment of choice. It is what happens when light is allowed to find you." The day of the exhibition arrived with a steady hum of nerves. The gallery was prepared, walls painted, prints hung, spotlights adjusted. Naomi arrived early, walking the space in silence. The photos, though familiar, felt new when displayed together. They spoke across the walls, forming a quiet conversation that only she fully understood. Guests began arriving as the late afternoon light slanted through the windows. Classmates, professors, artists from the city, and strangers who had seen the flyer online wandered in. Naomi watched from a corner, hands lightly clasped behind her back, answering questions when asked but never steering the conversations. People paused longest at the final image. Some leaned in close, others stepped back to take it in. Many said nothing at all. Janelle arrived halfway through the opening, wearing a long orange coat and carrying a bouquet of tulips. She walked straight to Naomi and placed the flowers in her arms. "You did it," she said, "and you didn't flinch." Naomi smiled. "I thought I might." Janelle looked toward the portrait. "But you didn't." As the evening wore on, Naomi noticed a group entering quietly through the main doors. Her mother, her father, Layla, and behind them, standing a little straighter than Naomi expected, Evelyn. They moved slowly through the space, stopping at each photograph. Her mother read every placard, her father stayed near the wall, hands in his pockets, and Layla bounced between images, occasionally pulling at Naomi's sleeve with whispered excitement. When they reached the final photo, all four stood in silence. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't ask questions, but she stood longer than the others, her eyes fixed on the portrait. Naomi glanced over once, unsure what she would see: judgment, discomfort, dismissal. But what she saw was something else entirely. Evelyn's face had softened, not in regret, but in recognition. She reached into her purse, pulled out a tissue, and dabbed her cheek. Just once. Then she looked at Naomi and nodded. It was not an apology, not a speech, just a gesture. And for Naomi, that was enough. When the gallery closed that night, Naomi remained behind, alone with the images. She turned off the spotlights one by one, letting the natural dusk settle in. The last light fell across the self-portrait. She stood before it, not as a child trying to disappear, not as a student proving herself, but as an artist, as a woman who had reclaimed her reflection and chosen to share it with the world. The face in the photo did not look away, and neither did she. The exhibition remained open for 2 weeks after opening night. Word of it spread modestly but steadily across the campus and into the city's artistic corners. Visitors returned, bringing friends and colleagues. A small article appeared in the university's cultural magazine and another in a local online blog dedicated to emerging visual artists. Naomi, though careful not to let the attention shift her focus, accepted the quiet recognition with a sense of calm she had never known. The fear that had once followed her, the sense of being exposed, judged, or diminished, had been replaced by something sturdier, something rooted. She continued attending her classes, finalizing her graduation preparations, and submitting pieces for smaller community exhibits. But no moment echoed with the same personal magnitude as that night in the gallery, standing before the self-portrait while Evelyn watched in silence. That look, soft, deliberate, unsentimental, had said more than Naomi ever expected to receive. It was not an apology, but it was presence. That, she realized, could be its own kind of healing. The next Sunday, Evelyn invited Naomi to join her for lunch alone. No family, no obligations, just the two of them. Naomi hesitated before accepting. It was not out of anger. That edge had worn away with time. But history does not always stretch comfortably between two people, even when they share blood. She went anyway, carrying no expectation but hoping for something. Perhaps clarity, perhaps peace. They met at a small cafe Evelyn liked, one of those old, dimly lit places with ceiling fans and high-backed booths that felt preserved in time. Naomi arrived first and chose a table near the window. She wore a simple navy dress, her camera tucked away in her bag. When Evelyn entered, dressed in her usual pressed blouse and pearls, she smiled, not stiffly, but sincerely. They ordered. They spoke of simple things at first. Layla's schoolwork, the summer heat, Naomi's upcoming graduation ceremony. Evelyn asked how the exhibit had gone since the opening. Naomi answered, not with detail, but with a quiet affirmation that it had mattered. And then, just as the waiter cleared their plates and the lull between conversations settled like dust, Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a folded page. She slid it across the table. It was a printed photo. Naomi's self-portrait, reduced in size but clear, framed by Evelyn's hands like something precious, not fragile. "I had someone at church print this from the article," she said softly. "I hope that's all right." Naomi nodded slowly. "Of course." Evelyn kept her fingers resting on the edge of the paper. Her eyes didn't meet Naomi's right away. "I've looked at it many times," she said, "not just because it's beautiful, though it is, but because I didn't understand until I saw it." Naomi stayed quiet. Evelyn continued, her voice thinner than usual but steady. "When I was a girl, no one ever told us we were beautiful. Not if we were dark, not if we were quiet, not if we didn't fit into someone else's idea of grace. So I didn't learn how to see it. I repeated things I had heard, thinking they were truths. And I didn't see what they did to you. I didn't know they stayed." She looked up then. "I see it now." Naomi felt something move inside her. Not shock, not even relief, but a deep acknowledgement, as if a locked room had finally been opened, and though the air inside was stale, it was still air, still something they could breathe. "I've spent a long time trying not to hold on to that moment," Naomi said, her voice calm without resentment. "But I did hold it, longer than I wanted to." Evelyn nodded. "I know." They sat in silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that feels fuller than sound. It was not heavy, it was present, shared. "I wish I had known how to say something better then," Evelyn said finally. Naomi leaned back slightly, her gaze soft. "You're saying it now." When they left the cafe, the afternoon sun had begun its slow descent. They walked together down the sidewalk, not speaking much more, but unhurried. As they reached the parking lot, Evelyn paused and looked at Naomi with a seriousness that was not stern but grounded. "I hope you keep making people look," she said. "You make them see what they forget, even me." Naomi nodded. "I will." As they parted, Naomi didn't look back. She didn't need to. The moment wasn't perfect, but it was real. Not everything needs to be spoken to be understood. Some things settle between people not as absolution, but as quiet recognitions that stretch the distance between what was and what can still be. That evening, Naomi returned to her apartment and stood before the original print of her self-portrait, now framed and hung above her desk. She reached out and adjusted the corner slightly, then stepped back and looked. She no longer saw it as a single brave moment caught by chance. She saw it as a turning point. And behind her, across the time that had once silenced her, the echoes no longer hurt. They simply faded. Graduation day arrived beneath a sky that could not decide between rain and sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of spring, flowers in full bloom, damp earth underfoot, the clean sharpness of early morning wind. Naomi stood in front of her mirror, fastening the last button of her shirt beneath the graduation robe. Her cap rested on the desk, tassel draped over the corner. Her camera, though not needed for the ceremony, hung on a hook by the door as it always did. A reminder, a witness. The auditorium filled quickly. Graduating students stood in clusters, caps slightly crooked, laughter echoing through the hallways. Naomi remained at the edge of the crowd, hands folded, quiet but steady. She was not anxious, not eager, just ready. Her family arrived early, claiming a row near the middle. Her father wore a charcoal suit, his tie slightly askew. Her mother carried tissues and a program clutched tightly in her hands. Layla, now taller and more expressive than ever, waved excitedly the moment she spotted Naomi entering with her cohort. And Evelyn sat between them, dressed in a pale lavender jacket, her posture as straight as ever but her gaze softer. The ceremony moved forward with the expected rhythm. Speeches from the dean, a performance by the university choir, lines of names called into the microphone. When Naomi's name rang out, her family stood. She walked across the stage, accepted her diploma with a nod, and turned toward the audience. She didn't search for them in the sea of faces. She didn't need to. She felt them. Afterward, in the open space outside the auditorium, graduates posed for photos, through their caps, called out to friends and family. Naomi, though content to observe, didn't resist when Layla dragged her into a picture. Her mother took another, her father one more. Then Evelyn stepped forward, not with her phone but simply with her presence. "May I?" she asked, motioning toward the camera slung over Naomi's shoulder. Naomi hesitated. Then gently she removed it, adjusted the strap, and handed it over. Evelyn's fingers wrapped around the body of the camera with a kind of reverence. She didn't fumble. She didn't ask which button. She looked through the viewfinder, adjusted the angle, and clicked. Naomi stood still. No smile, no performance. Just stillness. Then Evelyn lowered the camera and handed it back. "That one's just for you," she said. Later that evening, back at the apartment, Naomi transferred the photos onto her computer. The ones her mother had taken, the ones Layla had framed poorly but with affection. Then, at the end of the real Evelyn's, she opened it. The photo was simple. Naomi standing against a backdrop of trees, light falling unevenly across her face. There was nothing posed in her expression, nothing guarded. Her eyes held something reflective, as if the lens had not captured her but acknowledged her. She stared at the image for a long time, unsure whether it moved her because of what it showed or who had taken it. The next morning, Evelyn called. "I never liked being wrong," she began, her voice thinner over the phone. "But I've had time to think." Naomi said nothing. "I can't go back to that day," Evelyn continued. "And I won't pretend I didn't say what I said. But I see now how long it stayed with you. I see it in the way you look at yourself. And I see it in the way others see you now. That's not just talent. That's resilience." Naomi let the silence stretch between them. "It wasn't an apology then," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "But it sounds closer now." "It's what I have to offer," Evelyn replied, "and I offer it fully." Naomi nodded, even though the gesture couldn't be seen. "Then I accept it." They didn't speak long after that, but it was enough. In the following weeks, Naomi began preparing for the next chapter of her life, an artist residency in Chicago, a fellowship offer for a documentary series, invitations to submit her work to galleries she once thought unreachable. She moved through these decisions not with the urgency of someone trying to escape her past, but with the clarity of someone no longer held back by it. She took new photographs, some of strangers, some of friends, some of herself. She didn't always share the self-portraits. Most remained tucked into folders, unprinted but unhidden. One afternoon, while visiting a local community center, Naomi offered to lead a workshop for teenagers interested in photography. A girl with a shy voice asked how to take better portraits. Naomi said, "Start by letting people see themselves, not just how they appear, but how they are." The girl nodded, then raised her camera and asked if she could take Naomi's picture. Naomi agreed. She didn't flinch. When the shutter clicked, Naomi felt the echo of all the times she had turned away and the strength of all the moments she had chosen to stay. Some apologies come dressed in words. Others arrive in the act of seeing someone fully. This one had been both. 1 year after graduating, Naomi stood in the center of her first solo exhibition, surrounded by a silence that felt different from any she had ever known. It was not the silence of fear or hesitation, nor of hiding. It was the silence that comes just before something important begins, the kind filled with breath and promise. The gallery was a modest space nestled in a quiet block of downtown Chicago, far from the noise of the bigger institutions, but intimate and full of character. Exposed brick walls framed the room, and the lighting had been arranged with precision, casting each photograph in deliberate, thoughtful warmth. Naomi had chosen every image, every placement, every detail. This was not a student project or a class requirement. This was hers. The exhibition was titled "We Grow, We Learn, We See." The concept had formed slowly, as most of her best ideas did. It was not born from a single theme or image, but from the collective stories she had gathered over the past year, portraits of individuals who had, like her, once stepped out of frame only to return stronger. People who had been told, in quiet or cruel ways, that they were not enough. And yet here they were, framed, seen, honored. Each photograph was paired with a handwritten quote from the subject. No names, no biographies. Just a single sentence chosen by them, about identity, worth, or resilience. The images varied in tone and texture, some bright, some solemn, some defiantly joyful. But together, they formed a narrative of reclamation. Visitors began arriving just after noon, trickling through the entrance with quiet curiosity. Naomi stayed near the back at first, watching them engage with the work. She recognized the expressions, some thoughtful, others moved, a few unexpectedly emotional. She had seen these reactions before, but they never lost their weight. Midway through the gallery, near a pillar dressed in soft gallery light, Naomi had placed 2 photographs side by side. On the left, a candid shot of herself at age 9, taken by her father during a family picnic. She hadn't looked at the camera in the image. Her face was turned away, caught mid-motion, expression unreadable. On the right, Evelyn, seated in Naomi's apartment the month before, smiling with a softness Naomi had rarely seen, her hands resting gently in her lap. Between the two images was a small plaque with the title of the show etched into it. We grow, we learn, we see. It was the only pairing in the entire exhibition that featured Naomi herself. She hadn't intended to include it at first, but in the quiet hours of planning, she realized it belonged, not as a symbol, but as a truth. Growth does not erase the past. It frames it differently. As the afternoon passed, familiar faces appeared. Janelle arrived in her usual vivid colors, her voice rising in delighted exclamations as she studied each piece. She embraced Naomi tightly, whispering, "You built this, all of this, from nothing but light." Her parents came later, hand in hand, dressed modestly but with quiet pride. Her mother's eyes glistened as she stood before Naomi's portrait. Her father, ever steady, placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder and said, "It's strong like you." Layla explored the gallery with the ease of someone who belonged there, pointing out small details in the photos to anyone who would listen, always claiming, "That one reminds me of Naomi's old sketches." And then Evelyn arrived. She moved slowly, pausing at each piece, reading each quote. Naomi watched her from a distance, unsure what to expect, even now. But when Evelyn reached the final two photographs, the child and the elder, she stood motionless for a long time. Her hand lifted, lightly touching the edge of the plaque. Her eyes moved from one image to the other, back and forth, as if searching for a thread only she could see. Then she turned to Naomi, who had stepped quietly to her side. "You placed us together," Evelyn said, her voice low. Naomi nodded. "Because we are." Evelyn's gaze returned to the photos. "I didn't understand how much I hadn't seen. Not just you, myself, my mother, all of us." "We all learn late," Naomi said. "The important part is that we do." There was no embrace, no sudden tears, just a quiet understanding, sealed in the stillness of the space they shared. As the exhibition drew to a close that evening, Naomi stood at the door, thanking each guest, listening to the final murmurs of admiration and reflection. A young girl, no older than 11, approached her shyly and asked if she was the photographer. Naomi smiled. "Yes." The girl looked up at her, eyes wide. "I want to take pictures like this one day." "You can," Naomi said, kneeling slightly. "Just keep looking at the world with your whole heart. It will teach you how." The girl beamed and ran back to her parents. When the gallery finally emptied, Naomi walked back through the space one last time. The lights dimmed slightly, shadows stretching gently across the walls. She stood in front of the final two portraits once more. In the face of the little girl, she saw hesitation, confusion, a longing to disappear. In the face of the woman beside her, she saw acceptance, clarity, light. And for the first time, Naomi didn't feel like two separate people divided by pain and time. She felt like one story, full, unfinished, growing. She had taken her place in the frame, and the frame was hers.